it is my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Ed Diener. Ed Diener is the Joseph R. Smiley Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the University of Illinois. He received his doctorate at the University of Washington in 1974 and has been a faculty member at Illinois for the past 34 years. Dr. Diener was president of the International Society of Quality of Life Studies, Society of Personality and Social Psychology, and International Positive Psychology Association. Diener was editor of the journal Personality and Social Psychology, editor of journal Happiness Studies, and he's the founding editor of Perspectives on Psychological Science. Diener has over 300 publications, with about 200 being in the area of psychology of well-being. Dr. Diener is a fellow of 5 professional societies. He is listed as one of the most highly cited psychologists by the Institute of Scientific Information, with over 26,000 citations to his credit. Let me repeat that, 26,000 citations. He won the Distinguished Researcher Award from the International Society of Quality of Life Studies, the first Gallup Academic Leadership Award, and the Jack Block Award for Personality Psychology. Dr. Diener won several teaching awards, including the Oakley Cootie Award for undergraduate teaching at the University of Illinois. Professor Diener's research focuses on the measure of well-being, temperament, and personality influences on well-being, theories of well-being, income, and well-being, and with a 2005 book on multi-method measurement in psychology. Dr. Diener just published a book on happiness with his son Robert Biswas Diener, entitled Happiness, Unlocking the Mysteries of Psychological Wealth, as well as a book on policy aspects of accounts of well-being with Richard Lucas, our own faculty member here, Ulrich Schimack, and John Helliwell. A multi-volume collection of his most influential works in the area of subjective well-being will be published this year, perhaps maybe out already, the collected works of Ed Diener, as well as a book on the international differences in well-being, which he edited in conjunction with Daniel Kahneman and John Helliwell on the international differences in well-being. In case you're wondering, no, it's not a coincidence that I've invited Professor Diener, who is known as Mr. Happiness in the media, who holds the Smiley Professorship and is scheduled to give a talk on culture and happiness on April Fool's Day. The title of his presentation is Culture and Happiness Around the World. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Diener.
So I want to begin my talk with some people I'm grateful for. Fred and Young for arranging my visit, Michigan State Psychology and the university for funding it and hosting it, Joe White for his wonderful work, not just in funding this scholarship and talk, but also his wonderful work in terms of not black psychology, but all of psychology. Tremendous amount of contributions over the year. And then to the Gallup organization, who, as you will see, has given me great data to work with for this talk. And, you know, I used to skip all the gratitude stuff, thinking, I want to go straight to the data. I don't want to waste time with gratitude. And then we found out that actually, if you're grateful, you live longer. So I put it back into my talk, and I am grateful to these people, really sincerely grateful to them for all they've done. Why am I so grateful to the Gallup organization? Well, here are the data that they have, representative samples on now from the world. This is the first representative sample of the entire world. As you can see, a couple bad boy places here, North Korea, can't go there. Pirate land here, you can't go there. Can't collect, oh, here, yeah, try to see. Etc. So, but we have pretty much the whole world, the first sample. And these are not samples. These are representative samples of these countries. So very, very nice data. So this is one measure we use, Cantrell's ladder. And what we ask people around the world is, if this were a ladder and you were standing on one of the rungs, where at the very bottom, it's the worst possible life you can imagine. And at the very top, it's the best possible life you can imagine. Where would you stand? And we find that people, even illiterate people, can understand this scale. They don't have to point to a number. They just tell us where they are from the worst to best. And what do those data look like? Here is the world. And the dark green means high life satisfaction, the highest life satisfaction in Denmark. Then, as you can see, through much of sub-Saharan Africa, low life satisfaction, China, some of the Middle East, and then North America and Latin America, fairly high levels of life satisfaction. This is a theme we'll keep coming back to over and over. that very poor areas have low life satisfaction, but that doesn't quite explain everything about it. So here is an example of life satisfaction differences between countries. And what this shows is that they can be enormous. So we know there's differences between people. Everybody says who's happy, who's not, how you have happy attitudes and all this stuff, like from counseling psychology. But we're looking at something different here, whole countries that are happy or not. So if you look at Denmark, which tends to be the happiest country in the world, you see that the modal response on a 0 to 10 scale is 8. Most people in Denmark are saying I'm an 8. Only a few say I'm, a 10, but almost none say I'm down here. Whereas in Togo, which is an African country next to Ghana, you see that most people are down here around a 2 or a 3, and only very few are in the positive end of the scale. So much so that 94% of Danes are above 96% of Togolese. That means that, this is something you never see in psychology, non-overlapping distributions virtually. So that if you know Togo, you know that they had problems with slavery. They were one of the main places that slaves were brought through. Then they've had a lot of instability, human rights problems. The average income there is $400 a year and so forth. So there are huge differences in well-being between nations. We're going to talk about 3 reasons for those differences. The first being income, the second being psychosocial wealth, that is social relationships, and the third one being culture, person, fit. Income. So we know that there's vast income differences in the U.S., but they are small compared to what you see in the world, where the differences are really huge. And what we see is that income makes a big difference, much more so. So if you've heard of my research or other people's research on subjective well-being and income in the U.S., it's a small effect. 0.12 correlation, 0.15, 0.20 at the most. Say, yes, rich people are happier, but it's not a huge effect. It's kind of a small correlation. But when you look at the world, it's not a small correlation. As you'll see here, it is a 0.83 correlation. That is the average life satisfaction in a country and the log income of this log 10 income. So 3 would be 1,000, 4 would be 10,000, 5 would be 100,000. And you see here that a 4 on the scale is kind of characterizing people with 1,000 a year. And up here, a little more than 7 when people's income is 40 or 50,000 a year. So there's huge differences. You say, well, how can that be? Why would it be so good to live in a country like this rather than that? Is it just that you can buy expensive cars and expensive stuff? No, it's not that. It's that you can buy food. So, well, I put this in to show you where would you rather live. Would you rather live in Zimbabwe here or up here and with a happy president in the United States? Just huge differences, right, between these two. Here are what these differences mean. Longevity. Botswana, 36 years average life expectancy. Japan, the longest in the world, 82. In other words, they live more than twice as long in Japan. This is an amazing difference. Think how you're going to live a very different life in this environment. Assaulted this year in Japan, 0.4%. That's 1 person out of 250. They still think it's too high, right? That scares them. It's terrible. But look here, 1/3 of the people in Burundi say I was assaulted each year in the Gallup World Poll. I've gone hungry this year. Austria, 0.4. Chad, 4 out of 5 have gone hungry. So these are the kind of differences. So when we talk about culture, the first thing I want to say is psychologists tend to think of culture in your head. And we will talk about that. And of course, that's important. But first of all, let's talk about culture in the real world, out there where you're living your real life and what it matters there too, because that's very important for happiness. But there is more than money involved. So I want to say money is important. But if you know the article that I wrote with Marty Seligman, it was called Beyond Money. Let's look at what else is important and what else may count beside money for happiness. So I began this search, this cross-cultural search. Here I am. This is about 1980, and this is our son Robert. And we canoed up the Amazon River, and we visited these Indians in the Amazon jungle called the Yagua. And here they are using a blowpipe. and they're showing Robert, and you know, they shoot monkeys with the curare in that, and they gave him a blowpipe, and he brought it home. I think he still has it. They also gave him darts tipped with curare. But, you know, curare is what they poison the monkeys with and kill them. But his mom wouldn't let him keep the curare, but he did bring home the blow dart and shot his friends with it and stuff. And this kind of made him fall in love with cross-cultural stuff, and he's been doing it ever since. He's collected a lot of data, as you'll see from me. He went on, for example, here he is. He's being branded by the Maasai in a rite of manhood. They were burning him with a stick. And after that, data collection became much easier with the Maasai, because now they sort of respected him. And I always felt like, gee, could I ask a grad student to do that? No. And it didn't go through the ethics. It didn't have to go through the ethics committee, right? Because he was not the subject. He was the experimenter. And he collected a lot of data from the Maasai and around the world for us, and I'll show you those data. And he's still, you know, kind of a macho guy. He likes doing this stuff and traveling around the world. So here are some data. Some data we collected with the Forbes richest people in the world. These are people that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars or more. These are not rich people. These are super rich people. And on a 1 to 7 scale with life satisfaction, they were a 5.8, exactly what the Amish were in Pennsylvania, 5.8. Now, you know the Amish lead a simple life. The Amish are not rich, and they're the same in life satisfaction. The Maasai, think of this. These are traditional Maasai. These aren't Maasai who moved to Nairobi. These are Maasai out on the Serengeti Plain. They have no running water, no electricity, very little health care. They drink the blood of their cattle. They have a little bit of leaves and stuff for vegetables. And here they are, 5.4 in life satisfaction. Fairly high. The Inuit, these are people above the Arctic Circle in Greenland. You know, 3-4 months a year, dark, etc. Kind of a miserable place for us. Ice most of the year, and pretty high. Now, here's the neutral point of the scale, right here. And then here's who's unhappy or dissatisfied in our data. First of all, you see sex workers. Some people call them prostitutes, is a new word, sex workers. Sex workers in Calcutta and sex workers in Detroit. And the interesting thing is, sex workers in Detroit make much more money than sex workers in Calcutta, as you might imagine. These people might be making $10 a day. Of course, that would be nothing for a sex worker in Detroit. And yet, the sex workers in Detroit are the lowest in terms of life satisfaction of any group that's ever been tested. Similarly, homeless in Calcutta, $1, $2, $3 a day income. Homeless in California, we were shocked. A lot of them have pensions, disability pensions and so forth. So their income might be $10,000 or $12,000 a year, even though they're homeless, and yet they are more unhappy than these very, very, very poor people. So there's more going on here. Of course, you can see something about income might be in here, but there's something more. There's something about respect, for example. The Calcutta homeless versus the California, or the Calcutta sex worker versus Detroit sex worker. So there's more going on than just income. Here's another one that shows more than just income. And this is back to that 0.83 correlation. But even with an 0.83 correlation, you have some huge outliers. So if you take two countries, Bulgaria, and that's here, and Costa Rica, and that's here, and the president of each, and so Zori's country, Bulgaria. And what you see is that, like many former Soviet nations, Bulgaria is unhappy, even though it has the same income. So here we are in Costa Rica with a 7 on the life satisfaction scale. Both countries are about $10,000 per capita per year in income, and yet Bulgaria is much less happy. Similarly, you take Denmark, again, the happiest country, and compare it to Hong Kong, very similar income levels, but for some reason, people in Hong Kong are much less satisfied. And we'll come back to that, why that would be. Another recent finding we haven't published this yet, but I thought was interesting. We looked at life satisfaction and we predicted it with progressive taxation of countries. In other words, do you tax rich people more and more as they get richer and richer, or does everybody sort of pay 10% or 20%? Or do rich people have to pay more? So we have the progressive taxation rate of a country. It strongly predicts life satisfaction of the country. But when we put this mediator in, satisfaction with public goods, it totally mediates it. So what happens is that where there's a lot of progressive taxation, people are more satisfied with public goods. That is with schools, police, roads, and all that stuff. And that, in turn, is a strong predictor of the nation, of life satisfaction in that nation. So one of the things we're arguing is that, in this debate, we can't tell you whether you should have high taxes or low taxes or progressive taxation. It's a political question. But we shed a little bit of light on it in saying where they do have progressive taxation, those happen to be happy countries. And it looks like one reason for that is people there are happier with the things the country provides, with the government provides. This is a famous graph. You've probably seen it over and over, the declining marginal utility of money. And what this says is, you remember before it was a straight line, money and life satisfaction, and this is curved? That's because this is raw income, not log income. So when you put raw income down here, this is in dollars US, in the world, what you see is there's a very steep rise from poverty, where you're making a couple $100s a year, up to 10,000, 20, 40,000. This is household income, 40,000. And after 40,000, there's only a tiny rise. There's still a rise. We're still seeing some increases, but it takes a lot of money to get an increase after 40,000 a year, namely after your basic needs are met. If you log the thing, of course, then it's straight, because these are bigger and bigger increases as you go up the scale. So we see that over and over, declining marginal utility of money. People say, will money make me happy? And I'm like, well, you're making $100,000 a year, so it'll take you $200,000 a year to get a little boost. Whereas if you're making $10,000 a year, you don't have to have such a big boost. It's going to have quite a bit of boost. Again, you could say this has something to do with progressive taxation and whether we should have it, because when you tax these people at the top, you're not going to hurt their happiness very much, whereas if you start taxing these people, you are. Now, I know there's all kind of other arguments about taxes, about whether it's going to hurt the economy and all that I can't talk to, but this is just about the happiness part of the equation. Now, another thing we find besides money and material things, like whether you have enough food and all that, we have measures of food and housing and health care and all that. Those all predict pretty well life satisfaction. Not perfectly, but they're strong. Whereas what I call psychosocial things, what we might call strengths in counseling psychology, they are predicting people's positive feelings. Am I enjoying life? Do I like my life? Not life evaluation, oh yeah, 1 to 10, but hey, I'm having fun in what I'm doing. I'm enjoying people and so forth. What matters here is I have people I can count on. The Gallup question is, in an emergency, is there someone you can count on to help you? And about 10% of people in the United States will say no, but in some countries 50% say no. So that's a very serious problem if half the people say there's nobody I can count on. Are you respected? In certain Latin American countries, 95% of people say yes. In certain other countries, 50% say no, people don't respect me. And those predict this. Similarly, mastery and learning. So you say strengths-based. I'm doing things that I enjoy, I'm good at, I know how to do my job, I have the tools to do my job, I enjoy it and I'm motivated and so forth. Those predict positive feelings. So you talk about what predicts subjective well-being, but what we're finding is that very different things predict these two different types. Yes, there's a little bit of correlation here and a little bit here. There's cross-correlations, but the strong one is within. Okay, so here's examples then. If you have that, what I just showed you, what you have is countries that are high and low in different kinds of subjective well-being. It's not all just, Denmark down here, right? They're high in everything. Yes, there are such countries. Or, Togo up here, yes, there's countries that are low in everything. They're not very happy. But what you see is the off-diagonals here too. So what you have here are some countries that are fairly unhappy. Georgia, during the time we were collecting the data, a lot of conflict. Russia, all kinds of bad things in that area with Armenia and so forth. And the Congo, they're low. Up here we have New Zealand and Costa Rica, two countries that are high. But then we have a country that is very high in life satisfaction but low in positive feelings, like Singapore or Croatia. So Singapore, super success. They make more money than we do now. They're working hard. They're working night and day. But they don't enjoy life, but they're pretty satisfied. And then over here we have people who are not very satisfied, but they seem to enjoy life a little more, like in the Philippines. Yeah, I kind of enjoy my work and all that. I'm not super satisfied because I really don't have much money. I'd like to have much more money, so that makes me dissatisfied, but I'm enjoying things. And so there's these two different patterns in the world. Now, if you gloss over that, though, and say who is really unhappy and who's happy, here are the 5 most unhappy countries and the 5 happiest countries if you add everything together. So negative affect, positive affect, life satisfaction, the absence of negative, and Togo is the unhappiest country in the world. Iraq, I mean, obviously, we went in there, it's a mess. I mean, the whole country is now just in shambles. It's really terrible. I think America, tried to help, and it's really difficult. Palestine, Armenia, a lot of conflicts in that area. Sierra Leone, as you know, is hopefully coming out of that now, but had a lot of problems, as you know, from the films and stuff. And then the happiest tend to be the Scandinavian countries. And we might say, well, it's a lot of money. They have a lot of money. And it's equality. They have that. But they also have enormous amounts of social trust in those countries. When we ask, if you drop your wallet, would these people return it to you? And then we say, the police. Would the police return it to you? Here they say, no. Why would they return it to me? Here they say, the police, of course they would return it. Then you say, your neighbor. No. My neighbor would keep it. Of course my neighbor would. Now we say, a stranger. Now it gets really wild, right? Nobody says a stranger would return their wallet. Here, 80–90% of people believe a stranger would return their wallet. People say, why? I've been to Denmark. It doesn't seem like they're that happy. Well, they're not jovial. They're not, out there hugging everybody and all that and euphoric, but they are very satisfied and sort of, there's not any serious problems, and they trust each other and they think things are going well. They're happy in that way. Okay, so the unhappiest places have high levels of hunger, and we can talk about all the psychology and positive psychology and getting people to think right in the world, but until we tackle some of these problems, we're not going to, make people happy, and if we did, it might be, almost a mistake in a way without, solving the underlying problems. Distrust and corruption, we find corruption is a huge predictor. The more corruption in a country, the less enjoyment of life. And then a lot of internal conflict, as you saw. And over here, we have societal trust, social support. I can count on others. And my basic material needs are met. I don't need luxury. I don't need a Mercedes. But I do need housing, food, medical care, that kind of thing. Okay, culture and social relationships. Now, I'm going to come to a little more controversial thing, because I'm going to compare these two and say, this turns out to be a happier way to be culturally than this, okay? And so I'm treading on touchy ground here, because what happened in Confucian countries, these are collectivists, but in a different way. Everybody said it's great to be collectivist, because a collectivist culture, you want to be individualists like Americans, everybody out for themselves and all that. But you forget that also Americans get to do their own thing. My dad was a farmer. I hated farming. But if I lived in a collectivist culture, I'd be a farmer right now. But I love research. And I got to marry who I wanted, etc. So there's some good things about individualism. But there's some bad things about collectivism that people don't often tell you. And one of the bad things is you are supposed to see yourself as other people see you. Fine, and then you conform. They don't have much social pathology. As you saw, they have low levels of crime. Everybody's working hard. But another thing happens as the market economy picks up. They are also the most materialistic people in those kinds of cultures. They see people as other people see them. Now they want to be successful in other people's eyes. So great concern with luxury items, and great concern with appearance. For example, anorexia, a huge problem we'll talk about. So it turns out that there's some bad things about this external locus. It's not all good. And you're very critical. You're critical of yourself and you're critical of other people because you're always looking for faults. I think that's one of the major differences between these two. Here you're looking for faults. That's why we get cars, you know, from Japan that mostly don't break, right? Because they're real concerned about avoiding air. In Latin America, you have a culture that's much more warm and accepting. If you go to college, that's great, but you know, if you don't, there's not as much pressure on you and so forth. You're proud of yourself, you're proud of your family and so forth. And what we see then is this cultural difference playing out around the world. So here we have two sets of countries. Again, on that same chart, we have 5 countries here, and those are Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. No, those are these. See, their income is about $40,000 a year. The income here, Latin American countries, right here, is about $10,000, $12,000 a year. And yet these countries are all more satisfied than these 5 countries who make 3 to 4 times as much. This is huge to try to explain this, because obviously we got this 0.83 correlation coming through here, and you say, wow, that explains everything, but it doesn't, because here you have some other interesting patterns going on. And the Latin American versus the Confucian is one of those patterns. So we're going to do a little case study today of South Korea. South Korea asked me to come talk last summer to the Korean Psychological Association, be the keynote speaker. And they said, we want you to come. We think we got problems in South Korea. We want to convince the politicians and economists and all that, because psychologists think they got problems. So we want you to come and tell us what the problems are. I'm like, holy moly, just what I don't want to do, right? To be an ugly American, go somewhere and tell them what's wrong with their culture. So, you know, and I kept saying over and over, you know, I'm not saying America's great and all this stuff. But anyway, that's what they wanted me to do. Well, when I looked at the data, I was convinced that they were right, that they do have a serious problem. Korea is one of the less happy countries in the world compared to how rich it is. And it's striking. And I saw it in all the data. And I started trying to figure out why it was. And I'll show you why I think it is. And the Korean psychologists mostly agree with me. All right, OECD, that is the 34 of the richest countries in the world, pretty much the richest countries. Mexico is in here, and you know, there's a few rich countries that aren't, but pretty much the OECD. Here we only have, I think, 29, but it has 34 now. And this is positive, affect balance means positive affect minus negative affect. So if I feel a lot of joy, but I also feel a lot of anger, then that's going to, you know, be 0 because I feel both. If I feel a lot of joy and don't feel much depression, sadness, and anger, I'll have a big positive affect balance. And what you see is that in Denmark, it's big, right? 73% of people feel more positive than negative on a daily, and these are daily, so daily basis. And you can see again the kind of standard people who come in high. The U.S. here is kind of in between. It's sort of in the middle in terms of affect balance, 58. And then you see down here, second to the bottom, 38%. And only Turkey being lower, which was having a lot of upheaval at that time, you know, whether it was going to be a Muslim government and they would have tension and so forth. So South Korea, 38, so very low, you know, less than half of, or about half of what the top are. So you say, well, maybe this is response bias. Fred and I said, how can you measure happiness in different cultures? Maybe they don't want to tell you they're happy. Maybe they avoid the endpoints of the scale because they don't want to have extreme response bias. They say, want to fit right in the middle of the scale. Maybe they're humble. They want to say, oh, I'm just, you know, all kind of reasons. Well, the next slide should tell you there's not that much truth in that, because these are suicide data. Here we have the suicide data from the same countries, and what you'll see here is Korea far and away, well, we had put it in French, right? Because they're part of the OECD and they want everything in French and English. But anyway, you can see here men and women. And so the men are about equal to Hungary, but the women are much higher than any other country in Korea. So they have by far the highest suicide rate in the world, and the OECD average, in this case 29 countries, they're twice as high as the average. They're committing suicide at a very high rate in Korea. Everybody thinks it's, you know, Sweden and Denmark and all that, but you see Sweden and Denmark and all that, the happy countries, they score kind of in the middle of the pack generally in terms of the rich countries in terms of suicide. Okay, why? Well, let me give you the first reason. They are extremely materialistic. Everybody says, oh, Americans are materialistic. Around the world you go, oh, Americans are so materialistic. Well, we find that Americans are materialistic to some degree, but not as much as in some of these countries on the Pacific Rim that have grown so fast. So why do people think Americans are materialistic? Well, because we have more money. So, of course, we're buying a lot of stuff. We're the richest country in the world. So they see that, and they see what's on television. But when you ask people, is money more important than love? Americans don't say yes to that question. But what you can see is that South Koreans scored much higher. This is a 1 to 9 scale where 9 is extraordinarily important. This is the most important thing. And they're at a 7, you know, that's getting up there pretty darn high, and one of the highest countries in the world in terms of materialism. If you do studies with American college students and Korean college students and you say, okay, I want you to tell me what this is, a Ferrari. I want you to tell me what this is, a Rolex or Cartier. And American kids sometimes know it, sometimes don't. In Korea, they get 100%. They know, you know, Prada and all that stuff. They know what luxury goods are, and they're very oriented toward that. Here's another thing that's shocking about Korea. And here I compare it to Costa Rica, which does so well for only a modestly wealthy country. I am respected by other people. This is how many percent say I'm not respected. In Korea, only almost 40% say they are not respected. In Costa Rica, almost nobody says that. I am without social support. I have nobody I can count on in an emergency. 1 in 5, 1 in 4, whereas in Costa Rica, again, almost nobody says that. These are shocking figures. One person out of 4, think what that means, or out of 5, saying, if I had an emergency, I have to go to the hospital or something like that, I have somebody I could count on, right, to take me to the hospital or take care of my dog or take care of my kids, and saying, I don't have that. So these figures are very disturbing. And everybody I talked to in Korea substantiated, and they said, yes, you know, there is a problem in Seoul and that with this kind of thing. So what I found in South Korea was constant competition. It starts in the schools. The kids are competing on those tests. They are scoring very high, it's true. America wants to be more like Korea and score high like the Pacific Rim. The kids are working day and night at homework, trying to score high on the test, trying to get into the university. And then the university is like this, and there's not many spots, and most of them don't get into the university and they fail. And most of them don't get in those high-paying jobs where they all want to be. So there's all kinds of competition, but not outlets. Like in America, we're competitive, but there's a million things you can do, and they're all fine, right? You can go into basketball, you can go into acting, you can go into singing, you can be a dean. You can do lots of different things, and you're successful in all of those. Whereas there, the channel for success is much narrower. Very high levels of social comparison, which we find generally is negative for happiness. I'm always comparing myself to, you know, I was eating dinner with a bunch of famous psychologists, and they started talking about how smart they were compared to everybody else. And I couldn't believe this, and I'm saying, they're worried about it. How smart you are compared to everybody else. I thought, you know, okay, when you're in college, right, your GRE or something, you haven't grown past that and you're now famous? You're crazy. This is a recipe for unhappiness to continue to worry about that, and there's a lot of that social comparison going on there. Concern about appearance, real problems with anorexia, more serious even than our problems here with anorexia. The skinny model, you may have read about it, the skinniness in the society, and luxury goods and materialism. So all of these things then have conspired to make a country which is one of the tigers, which is one of the richest countries now, grew the fastest, just like Japan. I mean, look at the cars, the Kia, and all these cars we're buying from them. They've been so successful in one way, but they sacrificed too much in another way. They sacrificed too much, and now they're not very happy. And it's really a sad thing. So, in terms of happiness, the causes of subjective well-being, when we look around the world, there's certain universals. And these are not cultural relative. We find that basic needs predicts happiness in every culture. Can you be a little bit happy if you're starving? Yes. It's harder though, and we don't find it that much, right? We find a few people, yeah, I'm hungry, but yeah, I got my family, I got religion, got whatever, and they're still happy. But, these are going to predict. Social relationships, having other people you can count on. And another interesting one that's just coming up in positive psychology is being a person who helps other people. It turns out that is probably a strong or stronger predictor than getting help yourself. So if you take a person like my wife, who loves helping everybody around, helping her grandkids, helping her kids, helping her clients, etc., and she's like that, those people live longer and they're very happy. People who have others they can count on who help them, that's good too. But maybe, and the research is just beginning, not as good as being a helper yourself. And then there's culture specifics. Okay, so the culture specifics are things that are strong in one culture but not another. So for example, something that might predict in Black American culture but wouldn't predict in Latin American culture. And mostly we've studied the world, not the U.S., so I'll talk about world findings, but consistency of personality. In Korea, it's important not to be consistent. Okay, in America, you're supposed to be consistent. You don't want to call me a chameleon, like I act one way with Joe and another way with the dean and another way with Fred. I'm the same person wherever I go, right? At least I think I am. And I act the same way. That's an ideal in America, to be consistent. In Korea, that would be seen as being immature. You're supposed to say, you talk to the dean, you better be a different person than when you talk to your girlfriend, right? You change totally who you are depending where you are in your personality. And that's the, and when we look at consistency of personality, in Korea it doesn't correlate at all with happiness. In the U.S. it correlates pretty highly with happiness. Similarly, what I call self-pride. I'll show you some data in a minute on self-esteem and how that correlates with happiness. And that varies by culture. Okay, culture, person, fit. So in the last year, we've gotten really interested all of a sudden in this idea that another thing is that matters a lot to happiness is how you fit in with your culture. So we can tell people how to act and all that, but if they're in a different culture, we're in trouble because we're going to tell them to be weird in their culture, right? And fitting in with your culture is, we find, pretty important. So the first finding I'm going to show you is on religious people. So over and over now, data are showing that religious people are happier than non-religious people. You've probably all seen it in the newspaper. People are religious, they go to church every week, they're happier than people who never go to church, they're happier than the atheists and all that. So we got interested in this because almost all these data are from the U.S. And guess what? U.S. is a religious country. Not the most religious in the world, but toward that, compared to a lot of other countries in Europe and so forth. So what we did was we looked at religious countries and non-religious countries and religious people in each. And are they happier? And what we found was a strong interaction. So that in the highest religious countries, these are countries where over 90% of people went to church services this week. Okay, where everybody says, yes, religion's important in my life. I mean, I'm talking about 99% in some Muslim countries. And this is negative feeling, so high is bad. And this is the percent who say, I felt a lot of negative feelings yesterday, most of yesterday. And what you see is that the religious people, 21%, non-religious people, much more negative feelings, 28%, small error bars, huge samples. But over here in the Sweden, Denmark, non-religious countries, you see the opposite. You see less negative affect in general. But the non-religious people fit in better there because in Sweden, you only have 15 to 20% saying they're religious. 80% are saying they're not. And who fits in better now in that society, are they non-religious? Okay. So, so as you can see, the ones that keep coming in very unhappy is if you're a non-religious person in a religious society. That's the worst thing. Okay, now that's negative affect. The next one's positive. It's very similar, except over here there's not so much difference. They're pretty equal. Both religious and non-religious in non-religious countries are pretty happy. 73% I felt enjoyment most of yesterday, 72%. Over here, 70%. Religious almost catch up to these guys. But again, the non-religious in a religious country are the ones who are not enjoying life, not fitting in with your culture. So we find this in other areas of life too. And this study was just accepted, so it'll come out in 6 months or 10 years or however long it takes, but it'll be coming out. Extroversion. Rich Lucas found years ago that extroversion was a predictor of happiness in every country around the world. But in some countries it was weak, in some countries it was fairly strong. It was always a predictor, but it varied, but we didn't really look at that so much. But now we have an article, Michelle Gelfand and I and some others, in Psych Science this past year, that shows that if you are an extrovert in an extroverted culture, the U.S., okay, or if you are an extrovert in an introverted culture, Japan, you are going to be happier in the U.S. progressively. Your extroverts are happier in both places a little bit, but the effect is really strong when you live in a culture that's consistent with your personality. So if you go back to the cross-cultural work of Ruth Benedict, in the old days, the famous anthropologist, and she was saying, things about different cultures, but it was all kind of observational, right? She didn't have numbers, but she was saying, fitting in, and if you're over here, you have to act wild and crazy, but if you're over here, you have to act very stoical and calm, and if you're a stoical and calm temperament, then you get born in that culture. Bingo, you're lucky, but if you're a stoic, calm temperament over here and you're not wild and crazy, that's bad. You won't be as happy. And so these are data sort of to support that Ruth Benedict idea. And then the third one is this one, life satisfaction and self-esteem. So this is Marissa Diener, my daughter, who's a psychologist, and she said maybe things like self-esteem vary around the world and how important they are. We said, oh no, self-esteem, you got to have that in every culture. Well, it turns out that in the U.S., it's an extremely strong predictor of life satisfaction. Women in the U.S., 0.55, really strong. Almost self-esteem and life satisfaction are getting to be the same thing. But look at this, women in India. So these are data my son collected, I think, and 0.08, almost no correlation. He asked one woman, he said, well, after he did the interview, how you feel about yourself and how good you are at everything, isn't that important to your life satisfaction? She said, no, most women are like me. They're good at what they do. We take care of the kids. We know how to cook. We know how to wash clothes. We're all good at what and that's not a big deal. That's just what's expected and what you're trained to do from when you're young. And you obey your husband, and your husband goes out in the world and makes money, and you do this, and yeah, sure, you're fine at that. But self-esteem, thinking, oh, I'm great and all that, it's not very important to her. She said, what's important to me is whether my sons are doing well. If my sons are losing money and getting unemployed and all that, then I'm unhappy. And if my sons are doing well, then I'm happy. So it's a really different perspective than, oh, I'm great, I'm really wonderful, and I'm better than other people, and therefore I'm happy. The last question I want to deal with and try to get you interested in doing research on, a few of you at least, is it good to be happy? Okay, so you say, well, sure, it's good to be happy. You want to feel happy after all, right? I mean, don't everybody want to feel good? It's good to like your life and enjoy life. Say, yeah, but maybe it's not good for you. You don't function well when you're happy. So I'll show you some skeptics who don't think happiness is good for you. Gustave Flaubert said, to be stupid, selfish, and have good health are 3 requirements for happiness. Though if stupidity is lacking, all is lost. He clearly thought happiness was bad for you. Only stupid people are happy, right? Dear Mom and Dad, thanks for the happy childhood you've destroyed any chance I had of becoming a writer. Okay. The idea that, to be creative, you've got to be screwed up and unhappy. Same idea. So I was having this dialogue with the Dalai Lama, and he'd written all these books about happiness. And I said to him, do you think happiness is ever bad during this? And there's 3,000 people there to see him, not to see me. And so we had a pretty big audience that day. They just love him, right? I mean, they absolutely love him. And it took me a while. I thought I was supposed to be there to present research. I didn't realize I was really supposed to be there as a foil for him and sort of, to show him off, which is the purpose of the event. And so when he said he laughs a lot. He laughs at his own jokes really a lot. And he said, yeah, there's stupid happiness. And I said, what's stupid happiness? He said, well, look, if a bear's chasing you and you're happy, that's stupid. Because you should be afraid. Fear is a useful emotion. It will help you avoid the bear. It's a good emotion. You shouldn't be happy all the time. So even the Dalai Lama, who's trying to get people to meditate and be happy and everything, doesn't think you should be happy all the time. Are you annoyingly happy? Take the Spondex. This is a joke, right? Take a drug to bring you down. And maybe Joe should take this, He seems a little happy. So we look at the data. And what do the data show? They show the opposite. They show that happy people, in general, do better in a number of ways, and I'm going to talk about those 3 ways. It's not just that they feel good, they have better health, they have better social relationships, and some beginning evidence to show they even have higher income. That is to say, if you're happy, you get higher income. It's not that you got income and then it made you happy. Let's start with health and longevity as produced by happiness. So one of the famous studies, this is not the best study, but I like to talk about it because it's one of the funnest studies, is they studied these nuns and whether happy nuns live longer, but they had happiness data coming from them from when they were age 22 years old when they entered the convent. So they went into the convent and they wrote a biography of why they were going to become a nun. Now they start following the nuns at age 75 and see when they die. They die at 85, 95. They live a long time, right? They're not out carousing too much, so they live pretty much a long time. And, so what was it about those biographies that were happy or unhappy? So here would be an unhappy biography, a less happy one. I'm going to do my duty to God. I'm going to avoid guilt. I'm going to avoid hell. I'm going to become a nun. I'm going to serve other people so that God will take care of me and I'll go to heaven. Not a lot happy there. A happy one would say, it gives me such joy to love God. God loves me so much and I love people so much, and it's just wonderful that I have this opportunity to go out and serve with joy other people. Just full of positive words. And what happened then when they started following the nuns is that group lived about 10 years longer than the other group. And people say, well, that's nuns, you can't generalize. Well, that's true, but think about it. They all live in the same sort of setting. They live together. That we've gotten rid of some of the worst pathologies, severe alcoholism is usually not there, etc. And they all have the same diet, and yet a 10-year difference in age. Sarah Pressman then did it with psychologists, and she found about a 5 or 6 year difference. She's got 70 or so psychologists, did their autobiographies for happy words. The psychologists who were both social, had a lot, and mentioned, their family versus they just mentioned their work. Mention their family and also mention, things about happiness, live about 5 years longer in that study. Then she found my autobiography on the web, and she did me, and I was the happiest of all 73 psychologists. And she said, Ed, you are so happy. I said, well, I had read your study before I wrote my autobiography. So of course, I wanted to live a long time, so I wrote a happy one. Last month, Michaela Chan and I published a study in which we looked at 150 studies. This was a review of all types of evidence, and we say the evidence is clear and compelling that positive states like enjoyment of life, Negative states, the opposite, like anger, depression, stress, detract from longevity and make people sicker. And the other is true. And we looked at experimental studies where they manipulate mood and then they track some things in your blood and so forth. We looked at longitudinal studies that follow people, up to 30, 40, 50 years. Some samples ranging up to 90,000 people. We looked at natural experiments. You have a Northridge earthquake. More people die of a heart attack at that point. Various kinds of natural experiments. And we look at experience sampling where you're looking at people's moods through the day, natural settings, and you're following different blood hormones, cortisol, various things. And all of these studies, and animal experiments, which are the most rigorous. And where you say, well, how do you know if animals are happy? You don't, but you put them in situations that look like they'd make my dog unhappy, right? Or situations that are a lot more better, free range and all that. And these animals are healthier, and when they autopsy them, they show more healthy, tissue and so forth. All these studies then showing this. Now, what we don't know and may be suspect is, if you have some kinds of cancer and they say, well, be happy and all that, maybe that helps you, maybe that doesn't. I don't want to say it doesn't, but, the evidence there is much weaker that if you have pancreatic cancer and you're, reading jokes and all that, you're going to overcome it. I don't know that that's true. You'll probably be happier till you die, but you may not. But we do know, for example, one thing, palliative care. That's when they've sort of given up on you in hospice, but they're really taking care of you. When that's instituted early so that you have that social support, you actually live longer than when palliative care is instituted later, suggesting that it may make you it doesn't make you survive pancreatic cancer, but it may make you live somewhat longer. So the evidence here, I think, is not beyond a reasonable doubt, but is very strong. Social relationships. People who are happy have better social relationships. Again, the yearbook studies aren't the strongest studies. We have stronger evidence, but the yearbook studies are fun. Because what they do is they go and they get yearbook photos and they rate them for how much a person's smiling. Now, this young lady, Carol, this is when I met her at age 16, and I said, wow, she's hot. And but then I found out she was smart and nice, but what I didn't rate her on was smiling, because that is a predictor of how long her marriage is going to last. Now, Joe says, how on earth can this old man still be married to this woman that he met when he was 16? Well, the difference is I started in California, I left California. Joe went to California. So there might be something about California. But So the smiling studies, and the smiling study with the baseball players showed that the smiling baseball players live longer than the non-smiling. This has been replicated. It's been failed to replicate once, the smiling in yearbooks. So the women, what's happening in their lives is not living longer in this case, but getting married, staying married, rating their marriage as better. Okay, and that's happened over and over. But you have other studies where you're doing experimental studies where you induce positive moods. People become more sociable. They're rated as warmer by others and so forth. You have correlational studies, people interacting with depressed people. They don't like them as well. They don't want to interact with them as much. And Rich has been doing some stuff that's sort of tracking people over enough years that you see them before. Are happier people more likely to get married and so forth in the future? So I would say the evidence here is strong, although not overwhelming. We've still got a ways to go, but I would certainly want to bet on it that positive affect is going to lead you to have better social relationships. Then the third area, the more I.O. area, is we found in a study that we did a few years ago that happy young people, that is people entering college who are happy and cheerful, later, 20 years later in their life, are making more money controlling for their parental income and black-white college, etc. So we had 5,000 kids. These are from all black colleges, good state universities like Michigan, Ivy League like Princeton. We can't tell you where they're really from because it's all confidential. We had to promise not to tell you. But they're from those types of schools. And what we found was, at age 38, the cheerful guys as freshmen are now making about 30% more income controlling all that other stuff. Now it's been replicated by economists in Russia and also in Australia. So it's beginning data, but it's like, wow. I don't think happy people are smarter. It's not that they're going out in the job market. I think they're more popular with their boss, with customers. Other people like them. They're more positive on the job. They're better organizational citizens on the job. What does that mean? Organizational citizen is not about me doing my job well, being a professor, but helping other people do their job, not stealing from the workplace, not taking unnecessary sick days. Happy workers are better organizational citizens and then end up, everybody likes them more and they get promoted more. And so we find then that across these three areas, happy people are not, like Flaubert said, stupid, but actually in general doing better. But the 64,000 yen or dollar question, will these benefits generalize to other cultures where happiness is not so highly valued? So this is what I want to get you interested in, because there's almost no data out there. I think it's one of the big questions of the future. Because you see, if this stuff generalizes to other cultures, then we are going to want people around the world to be happy. If it doesn't generalize so that people in Korea who are happy are actually doing better in life, better social relations, and better health, if it weren't to generalize there, then we say, well, happiness, we can't push it so much. Well, I want to tell you why pushing it is a big deal now. It's a big deal because governments are getting involved, okay, in measuring happiness as a policy thing. This isn't dreamland. What I was talking about it, 1990, I come up here and give a talk, and it would have been a dream. Now, David Cameron, Prime Minister of England, comes out on our Thanksgiving, not theirs, and says, we are going to institute measurements of happiness to help us shape policy. And Lord Layard, a guy in the House of Lords, is pushing this for policy. We're not just going to look at the economy anymore. We're not going to look at whether people are making more money all the time. We're also going to look at whether people are satisfied with their life, enjoying life, etc. As an addition, we're not going to throw out the economy and ignore it. We're going to look at this in addition. The OECD, those richest countries, they are now going to institute those measures. That is huge. That's 34 of the richest countries in the world. So now everybody's interested in this, and I'm saying, well, I've been pushing it, but this is a big question. Will happiness be as functional in those countries as it has been found in the U.S., where most of those data have been collected? So I think it's an absolutely huge question. All right, let's wrap up. Major conclusions. Cultures and nations differ hugely in subjective well-being, even more than individuals. Life satisfaction does depend on material conditions, not just on that, but those are important. But beyond money, we have other things. We have other knowledge now, like materialism being so toxic. So it's good to have enough money, but it's not good to think money's more important than other things. That is bad. We found that in several different studies. Positive feelings, however, depend more on your psychosocial wealth, feelings of mastery, your strengths, social support, feeling respected. Those kind of things are really important, and they're not captured by GDP. We have to have measures of these things to pick up these other good things in life. And sometimes when people are moving from the countryside to the city, their social support's going down. In China now, they have a worse Gini coefficient, that's the coefficient of equality, much worse than the U.S., and it's getting worse all the time in China. It was a communist country. And our inequality is bad, right? Brazil's is getting better, and China's is getting worse, more rapidly than ours is. And so this is a matter of concern because we don't know what's going to happen to trust and so forth in those societies. And then person-environment fit matters a lot. So high subjective well-being is beneficial to health, relationships, and income. But we don't know if this is cross-culturally general, and this is a huge thing. I think it's one of the big waves of the future for my field, if not the big wave. All right, one last conclusion. This is about cultural relativism. I think cultural relativism was one of the huge insights of the social sciences. That is, when you go to another group, you do not judge them just based on your group standards, IQ or whatever it is. You have to go there and know what their norms, their values, what they care about is. And, you know, Ruth Benedict and all those anthropologists first pushed it, and then psychologists. I think it was huge. But being a good idea, we took it too far. And the too far was an extreme relativism which says you should never judge any culture. Everybody's the same. They're all good. You just have to look at them from their own viewpoint. And that took it too far because we find cultures where unhappiness is rampant. People live short lives. They're hungry. They're in total conflict. That's not as good. And we know that's not as good for human happiness. So when we say, you know, all cultures are good, we have to be very careful about pushing that too far. And that's just my own opinion. So, thank you very much. And are there questions?